My name is Kim Chaffin, and I work at Medtronic. I work in corporate research. My title is Senior Distinguished Scientist, although my degrees are in chemical engineering. So I do consider myself a chemical engineer as well as a scientist. I grew up in a small farming community in Southwest Michigan. My mom was a nurse. My dad was a photographer. And I was going to be a music teacher, high school band teacher, actually. So I went and I was applying to schools. We didn't have a lot of money. I remember going down to the counseling office and filling out, I grabbed a whole stack of scholarships. And I remember fast forward, I got a call on the high school loudspeaker, Kim, please report to the counseling office. And I went down to the counseling office and they made a big deal as I walked in. Like they had balloons that were maize and blue, and I had gotten a full ride scholarship to Michigan. And I was like, oh my God, but do you think I'm good enough to get into the music department at Michigan? Like, where's my audition? And they said, no, you misunderstand. You have been admitted. You won your scholarship for the College of Engineering. I went off to the University of Michigan, hoping I could get into the music school just for a minor, because I had to get this degree in engineering. And I chose chemical engineering because the music department and the chemical engineering department shared a parking lot. I kid you not. But then I took my first chemical engineering class and it was so cool. I never ended up being a music major. Chemical engineering was hard enough for me. And I just fell in love with the topic as I learned more about it. So I really took a leap of faith in picking this discipline. And now I have 3 degrees in chemical engineering. When I graduated with my bachelor's degree in chemical engineering from the University of Michigan, I took a job. I actually declared I was never going back to school again. And I took a job like every Michigan engineer does in the automotive industry. So I started at Ford Motor Company. I worked there for a while. I actually launched the 1994 Mustang, which was super cool. I wasn't a car guy, but I got to know a lot of car guys, and I got to drive those prototypes around town, which was super fun. I adored my job at Ford, but I ended up landing in corporate research doing adhesive kinetics, so curing kinetics on adhesives, which is another really core discipline to chemical engineering. And I, again, felt like I went through that transformation, just like I did when I discovered chemical engineering. I just loved corporate research. And one day my boss came to me and said, well, if you're going to stay in corporate research, with a bachelor's degree, you can never really be a thought leader in corporate research. You're always going to be, it's always going to be the people with the graduate degrees. And so I thought about that. And he said, you know what? Why don't you just try a master's degree? I'll let you leave work. We'll pay for it. And you can go back to Michigan and get your master's degree. So a few years later, I had my master's degree. And he said, so now you have a decision to make. Are you going to get your PhD or not? And I said, well, gosh, I'm just not sure. And when I was traveling for work, I was actually working very closely with H.B. Fuller here in Vandas Heights in the Twin Cities. And I was on a business trip, and on like a whim, I decided to go down to the chemical engineering department at Minnesota. It's a highly ranked program. And I got an interview with a couple of professors down there. Long story short, I ended up applying, and they actually ended up accepting me in this non-traditional path. And then I quit my perfectly good job at Ford and moved to Minnesota in 1995 on an educational leave of absence. I finished my degree at Minnesota in 1999 and never left. I was offered a job at Medtronic, and I thought I would get bored. So I basically said, you know what, I'm going to try this industry for a couple of years, 2-3 years, and then I'll move back to Michigan where all my family is. Well, I moved here in 1995 and it's 2020 and I love it here. So I actually was in the office for most of the day today. I'm at home. I'm back at home right now, but the first thing I did when I arrived at the office is I checked on a couple of experiments. We do long-term experiments that need to be checked on over time. And then I checked in on two of the different scientists that were in the lab working. We are doing a really interesting analysis right now where we think one of our adhesives, depending on how we cure this adhesive, can interact with the next layer of protection we put down on our devices. And we might have discovered something super interesting. And some people think that we can even write a patent around it. So we're really looking at proving out if our discovery worked. I never believe it if it only happens once. So we have to go back in and repeat it. So that was a day in my life just today. Medtronic was deemed an essential business. We treat about 75 million patients a year with life-saving devices. So certainly we wouldn't want to shut down. We wouldn't want to delay our supply to the field and these needed medical devices for our patients. So we have changed the way we worked. We have started to get more familiar with video conferencing. So we're learning just right alongside everyone else on how to do this remotely and safely. One of the things I enjoy about my job the most is the scientific process. And the scientific process, when it's applied in a corporate research lab like I work in, may be a little bit different than what you're used to in school, where you're writing lab reports. We develop hypotheses in real time. We often sit on teams and design those experiments. Sometimes we make little bets for a latte, or somebody needs to buy somebody else lunch, depending on who's right. And this is part of that constant interaction that often happens in real time and provides the real energy behind the research that we do. Sometimes that energy and that constant interaction has to be delayed because of COVID, and we have to schedule it in with virtual meetings. And that just takes a little bit of the fluid nature out of our work, but we're managing quite well, and we're all hoping to get back to normal soon. But I find laboratory experiments in college and in high school are very prescribed. You know where you're starting, you know what you have to find, and you have to very carefully measure everything in between. But that is just teaching you a way to think. So we use that methodology of thinking every day in our research, but we don't know where we're going. So sometimes we have to take a left turn because it makes sense to take a left turn. And one of the biggest challenges of my job is explaining that to our senior leadership who doesn't understand that science. I do a lot of translation between the frontline scientists and those senior leadership people to make sure that they understand we're still making progress towards the right question, and it's still worth keeping us working on this problem.